So, hi, I'm Richard Sewell. Mike Turner asked me to come and do a talk, and this is kind of a repeat of a talk I did at EMF Camp. So, apologies if you've seen it before. It was, what was it? Not the last one, before, like 3 years ago. Um, and this is really about how a random daft idea turned into what is now my living, a business. In the hope that that might be useful for people who have their own daft ideas going on and maybe thinking about whether they might turn into a bigger thing or whether or not. Um, this is what we make. Giant joyful robots, we call them. So these are massive inflatable robots. There's somebody there for scale. There's Lucy. So large inflated moving things, interactive, we take to like festivals, art festivals, that kind of thing. We are we're interested in lots of things, but Air Giants is really, it's a mixture of, we're a company that does, we do a lot of software, we do robotics, we do puppetry. We're aiming to make robots which are emotionally effective, so things that feel like something to be with, things that feel like they're alive. And because we're really using this very unusual kind of inflated robot technology, they're all giant and squishy, which it turns out is lovely. Everybody likes a massive squishy thing. So this talk is really about daft ideas that you have that you kind of feel like making. They're not necessarily useful. They're not necessarily profitable. Nevertheless, you're going to go make them. That happens a lot in my life, and I suspect in many of yours. It's about whether you should follow that muse when some ridiculous thing occurs to you. Interactive objects, these soft robots, having too many jobs and how tiring that is. A bit about how you physically start a company, where we are, what's next, whether it was even a good idea. So I'll tell you a bit about me. So I historically, I've mostly just written software in little companies of friends. So since 2000, more or less, a lot of mobile software on many dead platforms, Palm OS for a long time, lately iOS and Android when all the other platforms went away. I still do a little bit of that, but mostly I do Air Giants. But I also was made all kinds of stuff just because I liked it. So I've made furniture and luggage and clothes and jewelry and installations, all sorts of stuff. Here's a bit of a timeline. So this was kind of the thing that started it all. I'd made a little robot eye that looked at people in, I don't know, about 2000 or something. I mean, it was very low tech. It didn't really look at people. It looked at anything that moved. It was made out of a Christmas ornament and some servos. But people were interested in it. They saw it and they wanted to work out what it was up to and what it was thinking, and played with it. And that seemed like a thing that it would be interesting to do more with. And Anton and I were on our way back from one of the Dutch hacker camps, I think Ohm in 2013. We were in a motorway services on the M25, and we got to talking about how we could make a much larger version of the eyeball. So the original eyeball was about 3 inches across, and we wanted something bigger and showier. And we realized that an inflatable thing was a practical way to make a big ball. And so I set off to make a big inflated ball. This is actually it's sewn from ripstop nylon. The blower is salvaged out of an old central heating boiler. Combi boilers have really good blowers in. They have quite high static pressure because they're designed to run a very long duct. So they're an excellent source of blower. If you have a dead boiler in your life, steal the blower from it. And so this was, again, very simple. It looked for moving things. So there was a beagle bone running some kind of Linux, There was a webcam with a 360 lens literally taped onto it so it could see all the way around. Then in the middle of the ball, there's a light bulb and a mechanical arrangement with a couple of servos that moves this blue iris and the black pupil around so it looks in the right direction. So it wasn't very fancy, but it was quite effective. That is, people stopped and stared and looked at it and played with it and tried to work out what it was up to. But I was really struck by how nice the inflated ball was. Like, it was this big solid shape. It really felt like it was there permanently. But also, when you went to take it home, it was suddenly very small. And it turns out if you want to make large things to show people, you have to have a way to put them in your car at the end of the day, and you have to be able to keep them in your house. So I learned a lot from this, simple it was. This was another installation, again, for one of the Dutch hacker camps. This is the tuner on a stick, which rotates continuously, has a rangefinder. It measures the distances to the nearest things around it, and it makes music based on those distances. So if you stand in the right shape around it, it will play a tune. People almost never do, but it has some musical trickery so that even when it's not playing a recognizable tune, it's not too discordant and horrible. And I guess I learned quite a bit about how people interact with mysterious things from this. Again, what's inside isn't very fancy. There's a single ultrasonic rangefinder. There's some kind of Arduino. There's a little Adafruit card that's really a MIDI synthesizer on a card with an audio amp. That's about it. There's a slip ring. That is the cleverest thing in the whole thing. There's a slip ring to get the mains in. This I made with Julia, and this is the most popular thing I think I've ever made. This is the world of techno, which plays location-dependent techno. So wherever it is, it's got a GPS on the top. It takes the GPS coordinates, and those change various aspects of its generative techno. So it is always just building away, playing its techno, which always sort of sounds the same. It's the same structure, but it changes a bit depending on its location. And we take this to camps. It's where it usually goes, and I usually just abandon it in a path somewhere, and people push it around all day. They push it somewhere, they leave it, somebody else pushes it. When it goes flat, somebody always brings it back. This, I still don't quite understand why people love it so much, but they do. If you've been at EMF and you've heard some weird musical thing going by, it was probably this. But there's something here about how much people like to be trusted with things. Like, you've given them a thing to do. It's not a difficult thing, but it's a thing for them to do. And you've trusted them not to break it, run off with it, throw it in the river. Nobody ever has. I mean, it's broken sometimes, like bits fall off sometimes because it's not very well made, but it always comes back. Somebody brings it along and it's flat. Somebody brings it back and says, hello, is this where World of Techno lives? It's flat. And that has been delightful. And if you are going to these sorts of events, I would encourage you to see if you can make more things that have this kind of strategy in them, just because it's so lovely to do, really. This is what's inside. This is the most Raspberry Pi-centric slide of this talk. So under that big ball of wires, there's a Raspberry Pi. It's running Sonic Pi, and is actually, the music is a sample called Acid Techno that came with Sonic Pi. And in many places that used a random process to pick which notes to play, which beats to hit, that kind of thing. And all of those were replaced with things that use data from the GPS coordinates. So all the bits in the GPS coordinates are used one way or another. There's a battery in there. There's the cheapest car audio amp that you can get off eBay. There's a GPS receiver, voltmeter, so you can see when it's flat. That's literally all what's in there. I don't really like Raspberry Pi very much, because really because of the experience I've had with this, which I made and then it worked fine for a long time. And then, one day, actually at a camp, when I was about to give a talk about it, the SD card died and we had to build a new SD card for it. And the operating system had changed, how things started had changed. How Sonic Pi had to be started had changed. So while I was actually giving the talk, a couple of my friends went off and figured all this stuff out and beavering away with a terminal plugged into it. And there's something about the complexity and the lack of stability which I do not find very pleasing. Anyway, that's enough complaining. That is the World of Techno. This is where I met Emma. Emma on the right there is one of my co-founders of Air Giants. We were building this weird robot. This was for a TV program on Channel 4, paid a filmmaker to make a film about us making this robot and then taking it out and abandoning it in the streets in Bristol and seeing what people did. It was kind of half robot, half puppet. So it had a whole bunch of reflexes. It knew how to keep its head level. It could recognize faces and it would tend to fixate on faces. So if you moved its body, it would keep looking in the same direction. It breathed a little bit all the time. It had little arms it could wave when it was startled. And it would ask people questions. It had a quite fixed vocabulary, but it would ask people questions and then would be recording video with the camera in its head, which would end up in the film. Sorry, I'm just being interrupted by a cat here. It's amazing what people told this thing. We would leave it, just literally put it down and walk away. I would usually be lurking somewhere in the dark, keeping an eye on it, making sure nobody stole it. People would come along and pick it up and chat to it and tell it their life stories. It was delightful. And it was lovely to see how strongly people engaged with a thing which was obviously not alive. Nobody would seriously go, oh yes, I thought that robot was alive. But nevertheless, they treated it as though it was. And that was a big lesson for me in making things which people will engage with and be delighted by. You're not tricking them into doing that. You're inviting them into a game, if you like, inviting them to play that something is true, which in fact is not true. So while I was doing that, we did all kinds of weird playing with robots, and I got to thinking about fabric and air and robotics. These things were made with hot melt glue and fabric. The predecessors to these, which I do not have a video of, were actually made with an office laminator. You can make quite effective pneumatic actuators from office laminator laminates, which have been kind of made into envelope by putting two pieces of paper in them, cut into some cunning shape. But anyway, no pictures of that. So this was me starting to play with air and fabric and robotics. I met Robert. In fact, I met Robert at a Dutch hacker camp, SHAT 2017. He was running a knot workshop there. We got on very well. He had given up on a very boring software job and was looking for new things to do. And it seemed like we might be allies. Robert helped me make this. So this was an actual moving robot thing. This has range sensors, those little black dots you can see in the middle of each segment. That is Robert there, just being wrapped up by it. And this would... So this has quite a loose idea of whether people are near it, because it's only got ranges from these sensors, and they're not very good sensors. But this would play a game of either try to trap the person or try to run away from the person. And without any explanation, people would always get what the game was. They would understand it. They would often go along with it. And, you could engage them in quite complicated games without ever telling them anything, by just having the right behavior. This had a very weird and voluminous valve plumbing strategy, which was not in the end successful, but we learned a lot. EMF Camp sponsored building a thing. So John T literally said, Rich, can you build one of those air things and bring it, please? That was the thing on the right there, the Triffid. And then while that was not actually completed, but coming along well, he found a little bit more sponsorship money and said, can you make another thing? I should have said, no, we're busy. We haven't made that first thing yet. But in fact, I said yes, and we made two things. We spent all his sponsorship money on getting people to come and help do the sewing. So this was already in time. So this was now two things, two moving things, wiggling about, responding to people. They were not very responsive at this time, but kind of responsive. And really more learning about how you make this actuated fabric stuff. So now we come to actually starting Air Giants. Emma, who I met on that baby robot project, so her background is as a designer, a puppet maker, many kinds of maker, theatre design, that kind of stuff. Robert's background was electronics, robotics, but also all the kinds of making. And it's really notable how this would not have been possible if we hadn't all met each other and been at places in our lives where we could just go and do a new thing. If we tried to do this 2 years earlier or 2 years later, we probably could not have done, because our circumstances would have been different. People would have had babies and bought houses, or they had jobs they didn't want to leave. So this was about the right people and the right time. There was a grant scheme, the Southwest Creativity Network, which was set up to try to start new creative technology businesses. Maybe it was the Southwest Creative Technology Network, actually. I don't know. Anyway, we applied for it. We got a grant, 37K, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not enough to feed 3 people for 6 months, really. And we really were focused on making things that people could interact with and things that felt alive, and doing this air-filled robot business. Most of the time, it looked like this. We sat in Emma's garage, and we'd have a bright idea of how some actuator might work, and then we would sew it up, and then we'd inflate it, and then it would not do what we thought, but we would have learned a bit, and then we would do it again. Oh, sorry, cat assistance there. Go away, Bill. Thank you. But it looked like this: making stuff, inflating it, seeing what happened, doing it again. Eventually, we started making prototypes from actual thing. So this thing you see in the foreground here was the first prototype of a joint, which Luma has 2 of. So in October 2020, we'd made Luma, and there was a showcase as part of this whole scheme. There was a showcase of all the projects. This was in lockdown, so it was a video showcase, not in person. In some ways, I think we got very lucky with the timing of lockdown, because while we were stuck in the shed making stuff, everybody was at home. And then when people were no longer stuck at home, all the events started up again, but in some disarray, and we're suddenly looking for things. And we found that we could take things to events. Like, people would literally send us emails saying, can you bring that thing to our event? We will give you money. We didn't really know the event business. We were from makery backgrounds, not production backgrounds. So we got by. We learned how to do it. You can't really ever understand a market like that until you're actually playing in it. Like, people will tell you things about it, but it never really makes sense until you're actually yourself trying to work in that market and talking to people actually buying things. It's interesting how hard it is to understand what you could do until you're in the middle of doing it. We had a bit of money. We rented a workshop. This was in many ways a terrible workshop. It had a big glass roof. It was far too hot, or it was far too cold. The roof leaked. It was just big enough that we could inflate Luma if we had a really good tidy up first, which we almost never did because we had too much stuff. because it takes a lot of stuff to make robots. But it was a workshop, and we did a lot of work there. And we did all the other company stuff. So I feel like this feels intimidating when you haven't done it, and it feels boring once you have. So if you haven't done it, the lesson is this is all very boring, but you can just do it. We set up a limited company. We registered for VAT. We got some accounting software. We got an accountant. You have to have the accounting software that your accountant understands, by the way. So you should probably do those two the other way around. We got insurance, so professional liability insurance, that kind of stuff. And a lot of this stuff, actually, if you have an accountant, they can sort out the rest of it. A helpful accountant is gold dust, really, if you're starting a company. And we got a bunch of business support. So it turns out that there are people who are actually paid to help businesses get stuff done. So if you're starting a business, you want to find these people and tell them that you want help, and they will help you because they have to help people. It's their actual job. So we got it from WECA, the West of England Combined Authority, more or less the council, have a load of business support, and we got it from various schemes like the Southwest Creative Technology Network, who are set up to do this stuff. And making contact with those schemes is an important thing. They're hard to find if you're not already kind of in the business. But there's a huge amount of stuff out there. And this is, of course, the major problem. Where's the money going to come from? So we initially thought that all our money would come from showing things. In fact, about half of it comes from showing things, and half of it is various kinds of R&D grants and collaborations and commissions for art from people who are looking to fund building of new art. Funding is a complicated and imponderable landscape, and you just have to learn it if you're doing this kind of stuff. So there's a huge variety of people who will give you money, but it's all extremely specific. I mean, Innovate UK run competitions. They launch one competition a day, and most of them are things like improve efficiency in fish farming and higher quality photonics for the next century, and things that make no sense to me whatsoever. But a small percentage of it is things where you can turn up and go, oh yeah, we could do that. You just have to read all of their grant calls. It's very boring. There's loads of weird special grant schemes that you have to track down. Local business support grants are everywhere. They're usually quite small. Arts Council England will give you a grant to make art. If you're lucky, you have to fill in a massive form. It's very boring. And the other half of funding is not spending too much. So it helps a lot if you can live cheap. If you can not get paid for 6 months, then you don't have to earn any, the company doesn't have to earn any money for 6 months. Obviously, that is not something that everybody can do. It depends what you were doing before, how much you've got in the bank, how much your mortgage is. But it makes a huge difference to what you can do if you are trying to turn your daft idea into a big thing. Is how cheaply you can live for how long. The thing we haven't done, we haven't gone and got equity funding, which is what tech startups usually do. Partly it's because it's hard to really make up a business plan that says that we're going to make back 10 times what they invest in us, which is what investors usually want. We haven't gone and got debt funding for the same reason. The trouble with debt is you have to give it back, which means if you take debt, you have to have a very clear plan for how you're quickly going to use that money to make loads more money. And our business is weird and not highly predictable. Here we are. This was, I think, our first ever commercial show. Some very strange Bristol Arts event. Our first commission. Warwick Arts Centre commissioned us to make Coral Avenue, went and showed it there. That was a big deal for us. It was like, the first time going far away in a van with a load of stuff. And then we found we were touring. So we did a 4-venue tour in 2021. This was in Blackpool in the Winter Garden. We found we could tour Luma and 3 people and all the stuff sandbags, blowers, everything in one Skoda Octavia. It was very cozy, but it was practical. We don't do that anymore. We hire a van, but do what you can. We got a little grant from Arts Council England to make this, which is rock pool. These things kind of curl up and uncurl in response to what people do around them. Weirdly, people often try and roll themselves up in them. They even hold up their babies to be rolled up in them. We've seen that, not just once. A number of babies have been rolled up in this robot. It's weird. We found we could buy things. This is an exciting time in the life of a company. You can go, we've got some money, we could buy a thing. It turned out Robert had always wanted a particular stacker truck, like I think since he was a kid. And we had loads of stuff we needed to put up shelves and store it. And we could just go and spend, I don't even remember, like 3,000 quid or something on a stacker truck. It was a kind of a startling moment when we realized we could start spending money on the company instead of everything always being a squeeze to get by. It was a very lovely moment. We got an Innovate UK grant to try making our stuff but smaller. So the same structure of robot, but kind of 1 meter tall instead of 5 meters tall. It turns out we couldn't for complicated reasons, which if you've got a long time, I can explain to you. But the nice thing about Innovate UK grants is what they really care about is that you tried and that you spent exactly the right amount of money. It throws their accounting off if you spend the wrong amount of money. That's annoying to them. They've got spreadsheets. You've got to spend the right amount of money and you've got to try and do your thing. If you don't do your thing because it's too hard, that's okay. It's R&D and they understand that. We had an academic collaboration, so we've had 5 or 6 of these by now. This was investigating some questions about whether people who use communication aids could use soft robotics as communication aids for conveying kind of body language things, as opposed to what is usually done with communication aids, which is kind of informative sentences. We are, in fact, just applied for a bigger project to follow on from that, which I hope we get because it'd be fun. Unfurl, massive commission. We possibly oversized this. We're very excited by how big it was, but it was a lot of bits. And this is a whole garden of weird, giant, planty things commissioned by a consortium of outdoor arts festivals. I feel like the point of this story is, I mean, it's not just me telling you my life story, is there are all these different things that the company has done and which have brought in money, and that this is part of the kind of, I think, the life cycle of being a weird technology art company is you end up doing lots of weird different stuff. It's not like, regular retail company that decides they're going to make beans and they make a lot of beans and they sell a lot of beans and they just keep making beans forever. We keep doing different things in different markets that make money come from different places. Since then, we've toured Unfurl to a bunch of places. We're developing the touring business. We're looking for other markets to be in that are not quite so light festival-y. We've done a bunch more R&D. We did another Innovate UK funded thing about making these robots tactile so they can know when they're touched. They can squeeze you back. Many delightful findings from that. Not really sure how we will turn that into income or touring work because they tend to be one at a time interactions, which doesn't really work for a light festival. Another commission for Squeeze Me, which was a tactile robot, a whole bunch of robots that were stuck to trees, tied to trees in parks. We got a bigger workshop. It's exciting. And it's insulated and the roof doesn't leak. And we had a full-time executive producer now, which is marvelous because there's an awful lot of just running stuff to do, organizing, talking to customers, making plans work. You could use 2 or 3 really. So that's kind of the end of the story. There's some conclusions for if you think you might be planning something a bit like this. I think you should always follow your muse in these things. If you have an idea to do an interesting thing, if you possibly can, you should always do the weird thing. I mean, do it on a small scale, do it for cheap, whatever, but just have no idea where you might end up. This Air Giants was not something I had in mind when I was hot gluing little bits of fabric together and buying tiny little air pumps off eBay. You have to go down these weird alleys to get to interesting places, and that takes a long time. You don't go from nothing to doing one of these things. You have to let the thing take the time it takes, and it's kind of precarious. It's not a stable business. It doesn't make predictable income. It's much easier if you've got some other source of cash. If you're still writing some software for software money, have a well-paid partner, live in a hut so you can live really cheap. It's not a very good fit with a full-time job because you have to be flexible with your time and with your money. And a full-time job basically means you've already sold most of your time to somebody else, which is great because they have to pay you, but bad because it just soaks up all your time and energy. I don't really approve of full-time jobs. Just takes up too much time. Finding the right people to do these things with is vital, and it takes years, and you have to be out there doing things, because that's the only places you will meet people who are doing these things are when you're doing these things. Like, you have to see them doing it. So you just have to look at them all the time. It takes ages to learn the market, learn the funding landscape. All the business stuff is not as bad as it looks. It looks very formal and high stakes, but actually there's loads of people who will help you with it. You can get help. It'll be fine. So in summary, yes, you should make the thing. Whatever the thing is, go make the thing, because it'll be fun. And who knows, you might end up with a business. I mean, you might not, but if you don't try, you won't ever find out. That's it. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah. So Dennis has a question there. It's whether they use PTZ cameras in the talking robot for communication with the public.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
Is he used
In the chat.
Oh, no. So none of the Air Giants robots talk. That weird baby robot had it had a lot of technology in it. It had what was then current for drones. This was quite a long time ago. So it was some kind of wireless transmitter in the robot and a receiver with a little screen that the operator would be using. And then there was no audio path back to the robot. The robot had a small set of canned utterances which the puppeteer could trigger. What will the next development be, says Bruce? Well, we're currently working on some larger work, which I guess I can't say very much about, but with any luck, that will be about next spring. Those are things which are large and simple, not highly interactive. And we're actually also working on smaller, simple works, which we can just send, because it turns out one of the major costs of showing work is people, like sending people to go and set things up, people to run things. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy. Everybody ends up tired. You stay in a Premier Inn all weekend and eat bad breakfasts. And so we are really working on making work which is simple enough to run that we can just send it with some instructions, and somebody can rig it when they receive it and get it up and running and pack it up and send it back to us. And we actually have the first version of that right now is in Holland at Cine Kids, which is a cinema festival for children. So I guess we'll find out in a few days how well that's worked. It's exciting. The other thing is this tactile business. It's like we've made things which which people are always delighted to experience. And that is very lovely, but turning that into work that we can tour is not simple, because all the places we've toured so far are very mass audience. So just working out what those are going to be, what form they take, and what market they work in is not obvious.
Well, how often do you, and if we have problems in the day, like we got this thing set up and something breaks, is that a common occurrence, or is that very happen?
We have had a few failures in the field. Not very many. We've spent a lot of time packaging the technology so that robots have a CAN network inside them. There's a CAN bus connecting a whole bunch of little ESP32 nodes, and we've built the nodes, and the nodes are all in waterproof boxes, and the wiring's all waterproof, and everything's pretty sturdy. So it is reasonably dependable. If it really breaks in the field, there's not much you can do apart from apologize. Apologize, take the dead robot away. That's it. You can't re-engineer it. Bruce says, could we use a microphone and a voice and an AI chatbot? In principle, you could, but we're not going to, because we hate that AI shit. It's annoying. It's always disappointing. It's not like talking to a person, and it's not like talking to a computer. It's some horrible in between where nothing works right, and it's always frustrating. Bruce, you should go and do it. Make a great one. Show it to me. Prove me wrong, but we're not going to. A top tip for applying for grants. So all right, applying for grants, there is no single tip. All right, here's a tip. Just knowing what grants are available is a load of work, and you have to do that. That's the price of entry. So you have to, and I can chat more about this if you want to have an actual conversation. Send me a mail. It depends what you're doing. It depends who is giving grants in that region. It depends what your status is, because they all have their own eligibility criteria. You have to look at loads of possible funders and see which ones fit you. But yeah, Sarah, send me a mail. I'll stick my email address in here. There you go. Ruben says, why do you use CAN bus? Because it has enough data rate for what we want to do. It's very durable. It'll run over the kind of distances we need. I tried using I2C over 5 meters. It's a stupid idea. Don't do that. It's ridiculous. It's just very unreliable. It works well enough that you think it's kind of working, and then it breaks. A network stack is too fancy, and then you have to make really robust network cables, which is its own annoyance. Whereas CAN bus, you can run over cheaper wire. So we actually got a slightly fancy wire that has CAN bus wires and power wires in, so fat power wires and thin CAN bus wires, so that these things are all on single connectors, and that has worked well for us. I don't know if there's alternatives really. Maybe other, robust buses we could use, but CAN has been great. It's really simple to understand. We don't hate it. How do we weigh up making it anthropomorphic versus not? Well, so here, that's a big question, but here are some things. One really notable thing about Luma, the giant snail, is that almost everybody only wants to interact with the head. So even though it's 10 meters long, there's only this one place anybody wants to be. And that is, if you like, a cost of making something which has a face. If you do make something with a face, you have to be really careful not to make it too facey. Like if you put eyes on it, people feel like you're making the promise that it can actually see them. And unless you've done your sensing well enough that it more or less can actually see them, then you have overpromised, and your interactions will be sad and disappointing because they'll smile and you won't know that they smiled, and you won't respond to that. So we've never put eyes on anything, and I suspect we never will. If you put a head on something, then people will go and interact with the head, and you have to build for that. If you make something vaguer or looser, then people don't have such fixed expectations of what interaction they're going to get. And so you can offer them different and stranger interaction. The downside is there isn't so much complexity and richness to play with. But the upside is you don't have to build a lot of complexity and richness just as the price of entry. Luma is still puppeted. There's always somebody there. All the time Luma is inflated, somebody is there with a controller doing the puppeting, because even for Luma with no eyes but with a head, the interactions are too complex and human to be automatable. Our original plan was that Luma would be automated. It is not. I don't think we ever can. It's just too hard. It's actually, puppeting it is delightful. I mean, it's lovely to do, but you can't do it for more than about half an hour. It's quite full on. So Luma always tours with a crew of 3, so that somebody's puppeting, somebody's audience wrangling, somebody's having a break, and then you cycle round over the course of 6 hours or whatever, however long the gig is.
So what makes it difficult? Like, why is it tiring? What's the?
Just because you're watching all the time, like you're watching the person that's interacting, and in real time you're providing the interaction for them, but you're also kind of keeping an eye on who else is there. Like maybe you want to suddenly ignore this person that you're talking to and go say hello to somebody that's just arrived, or go and try and tempt somebody into an interaction over here and then come back to this one. Maybe you talk to the parent, then you talk to the kid, and then you talk to the parents. It's just, it's like being a performer. You're not physically visible yourself, but you have to invent the performance second by second.
Right.
It's lovely to do. I'd recommend having a go, but it's also a lot of work.
And how do you price your work? Like, how do you decide, whatever they're offering for a festival or whatever is not enough, or do you base it on how far it is for you to drive and stuff like that? Like, how do you decide what to charge?
Well, it's difficult. What you have to do is work out how awesome you are compared to all the other things that people might hire, and put yourself in the right place on the scale. So you have to know, what the going rate is in the market that you're in, and you also have to know how much you have to get in order to keep the company going. And you have to get enough just to pay everybody. If you're taking 3 people to Northampton for a weekend, you've got to pay for a bunch of hotels and pay everybody their wages and buy food. And the first number has to be bigger than the second number, otherwise you don't have a business.
Right, so it must be a lot of weekend work then.
Yeah, and we've been, initially we just did it all ourselves, and we've been growing a pool of freelancers who have the right skills, who can go and do it instead of us, which means they get paid, and we don't have to spend the weekend away, and that makes it possible. There's only so many weekends I can spend doing that.
Do you have like a support group where other people have similar small businesses and you guys learn from each other, or is it just you're off on your own and you're sort of making your way along? Just wondering how that sort of thing works.
Oh, sorry, your sound's a bit mushy. Can you say that again?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if do you have a group of similar entrepreneurs that sort of give each other tips and stuff like that, or support each other, or are you just off on your own and you're always wondering, by yourself?
We have a couple, not we know a lot of people who are in sort of doing creative technology things of various sorts, but not really many that have the same sort of structure that we do. So we're in between a weird art studio and a touring theatre company. We're sort of stuck in the middle in some funny way. It would be nice to have more, to know more people who were in this space, but we just don't. Oh, Dennis, you're in Blackpool. Fabulous.
Yes, I was in Blackpool at the time when that was on. And I thought, hang on a minute, I know that event. Yeah, I thought it was interesting, but I didn't understand what it was. But now I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what are the lights inside the your dance? Are they controlled? I mean,
Yes. So they are they're run off the same code. So there's code that's doing the motion and controlling the lights, and depending on which bit you're looking at, there's either a whole bunch of LED tape inside, or there's DMX stage lights. I mean, DMX stage lights are very handy. They're waterproof, they're sturdy. If they break, you can just go and buy another one. So we use those wherever we can.
how do you control them? Is that by relays or something?
It's DMX. So DMX is really some serial protocol. I mean, some simple serial protocol. I think it's not even duplex, and there's just a bit of code somewhere that spits out RGBs. It's a crazy protocol. DMX, you just send a packet, and the packet goes to every single light. So a bit more cat interaction there. The packet goes to every single light, and then you set up each light to tell it which bytes it ought to, which chunk of contiguous bytes it ought to pick out of the packet, and then you have to write code that makes the packet that all those lights are configured for. It's weird, and it's very easy to get it wrong when you're configuring it. But once it's up and running, it's very dependable.